Welcome back, Troglodytes, to your daily dose of guitar information, the Trogly's Guitar Show. Well, I didn't break any sales records this year like last time, but let's go ahead and check out the most expensive Gibson guitars currently on Reverb at the end of 2022. Because in 40 years, it'll be fun to look back on this video and be like, oh man, bursts used to be 400,000, now they're 1.2 million. Darn inflation. So to start things off, let's look at the most expensive actually sold gear. So here looks like some sort of a 54 Les Paul Custom. Must have been listed pretty early on in the year. Sold for, wow, nearly 40,000. That's pretty high for one of those. These old customs are definitely a great value on the vintage guitar market. Compared to like a real burst, this was technically a higher end guitar than that was at the time. But it all goes to show you what makes a guitar truly valuable are the people that have used it throughout the years. And that's the true reason why bursts are worth so much more. Now it looks like this one had been refretted, but for the most part, it appears to be original. But it wasn't a particularly clean example by any means. I mean, look at what's currently on the market. It seems like that one was a pretty good deal. Next up here, a black plastic Goldtop from 57, $140,000. Now, I might be saying, hey, Reverb must have got rich off of these sales. No, they didn't. They actually maxed their fee out at $500, which might sound crazy, but when the guitar is $140,000, $500's not that much of a premium to pay for helping you find a buyer. And ooh, it's also a Darkback. That's a cool combination, black plastics with the Darkback. Oh, what's this doing on the list? 72 SG Deluxe? There's no way. There's no way that sold for anywhere near that amount. And if they did, they got really lucky. This would be like a $35,000 to $4,000 guitar, but what made this particular one special is the fact that it had stereo output jacks, apparently stock from the factory. I mean, that's clean, but there's no reason for that to have sold for anywhere near that amount of money. Because it's not like it's a one of one. There's a couple of them out there. And I've turned these down before for like $5,000. So there's got to be more to the story on that. So to do this, we type in Gibson. And we use this filter for high to low. So our first one here is very expensive at $485,000. However, it appears to be the holy grail. It's got a nice top, maybe not traditionally uniformly flamed, but it's unique. It's a character top is the best way to describe that. That's going to have a lot of movement in person. And I'd say it looks a little bit better from this angle. And wow, that is really clean for the headstock, like scary clean. Okay, we do have a little bit of wear on our fretboard. And there we go. There's your perfect serial number. This is exactly what you want if you're looking for a clean burst. But keep in mind, I'm not an expert when it comes to bursts, but a lot of this looks completely legit. And oh, here's a photo of Derek Trucks playing it. So they nicknamed this one the Black Magic Burst. And apparently 20 years ago, the original owner decided it was time to part ways with it. He just used it in Flint, Michigan, not too far from where it was originally created, and played it at church. And apparently you're going to see this one in the Burst Believers book. So that's pretty good for authenticity. Then we got ATB over here with more of like a iced tea / almost going into lemon territory. Then they also have a different one that's a little bit more cherry-like from 1960, but with 59 specs. But I really like the vibe of this one. It's a 58, so it's going to have the bigger neck. And I'm not a big fan of Bigsby's, but this is a nice plain top. Definitely not perfectly untouched pickups, but it's got some good character. And stepping up to the plate next, we've got Eric's interesting double necks. Now you got the EDS 1275, but have you ever heard of like the EMS series where you have electric mandolins? Sometimes you have them mixed with guitars and basses. That's like his specialty. He's got a pretty interesting collection. Like if you go to any of the major guitar shows, sometimes he'll bring these out. And we've got a couple of nice 335s here. Natural finish, that's going to sell for a premium. That thing appears to be very clean until you look at the headstock. Oh, nice. It's got a little bit of figuring within your neck. Still the original buttons. But if more wears to your style, that's what this one's got going for it. It's funny, in my SG video, there's a lot of guys that are like, I wouldn't want to buy one that's that clean. But to be honest, that SG was not scary clean. Like sometimes there's scary clean guitars where you're like, is it a refinish? Is it not? For example, here's a 57 listed as near mint. Yeah, that looks pretty clean, a little bit cleaner than the one that we had documented on the show. Sure, it's got some wear, nicks and dings. That's from 1957. I mean, this just looks like it was very carefully played. But now we've got some interesting guitars. So the Nancy Wilson $100,000 SG that we talked about in this episode when we covered the entire thing has not sold. This is the one that she liked to flash the Marine Corps on the back of the guitar while on stage. But in 2 months, nobody has come forward to claim it for $100,000. Now, to be fair, this guitar, I mean, in and of itself, may be worth around $2,500. And anything above and on top of that is just because Nancy owned and toured it. But now we've got some interesting ones. Because bursts, they're cool. We're going to see those every year. There's actually quite a few on the market. Usually anything nice, priced appropriately, sells like instantaneously. And anything that has some sort of an issue or has a very high price will sit for a while until it finds its buyer. But now is where things get interesting. Here we have one of these, the 2021 Korina set. So this is the guitar I broke a record with on Reverb selling it. But brand new, this was a $30,000 guitar, but not just anybody was really allowed to buy those. And you had to know very early to get your foot in the door on them. And then you had these guys at $20,000, which anybody who wanted one could buy one. If I remember correctly, they made like 81 of these and 19 of that. And nowadays, these generally sell between $19,000 to $25,000. And where's the Explorers? It's hard to really peg the market on those. As of right now, this is the only public set available for sale, and they're only selling it as a set, so whether you want the Flying V or not, you have to buy it. Here's a 1992 set, which is technically pre-custom shop, making them pretty darn cool because they're technically prehistorics, I do believe. I'd never even heard of this release. But this guy dropped this set for 50 grand after seeing the latest edition completely sell out really quickly. And he hasn't had any offers on it. Now keep in mind, these ones do not appear to have the Brazilian rosewood fretboard, and that's what makes the other ones so expensive and collectible. But I bet when these were released, they were probably pretty cool and just as iconic. So will the prices erode over time, or has Gibson made enough of a shake in the market to make them continue to go up? Because you got to think about this logically. This is kind of a new thing for Gibson, the collector's editions. And 20, 30 years down the road, will we say, yeah, this was the first set that the Gibson Garage sold themselves? They did that whole little trip, and then you have the Greeny coming after that prototype run that was only sold by the Garage before they came out with the later Greeny edition. So all I'm saying is it'll be interesting to watch where the market goes with that. It's kind of like the Greeny release, but a little bit different. These are starting to pile up. There's 2 of them on Reverb now. And as far as I can tell, they're not getting good enough of offers to actually want to sell these. And I'm sure most of these offers are like people offering them $1 and just wasting their time. But let's just say, if I would have bought one of these and my offer was accepted, that was above retail, I would have been on the most expensive gear purchased on Reverb list, but this time as the buyer instead of the seller. Next up that's interesting is a Snakepit, listed for an absurd $99,500. That is not a real asking price, my friends. I would view $40,000 as like top dollar for one of these currently. This is one of those examples of, I wish I had photo capturing of these 4 or 5 years ago. It was kind of hard to sell these. They would sell in like the $2,500 to $3,500 range. But what I heard is there's a guy overseas who's hoarding these. So he basically bought every single one that was for sale. And now that there's none here, we get the listing of the crazy priced one. And I tried to make this guy a real offer and he just wasn't interested. And that's fine. You might find some rich collector guy who doesn't want to wait for a different one, and he might pay it. But my problem is I really do want one of these in my collection because the Snakepit is a part of my story. More so the fake pit, but I want a real one too. But for me, the real kicker about this one is it's from the second batch. And if somebody's going to pay silly money, you at least want it to be a low serial number from the first batch, right? So for my sake, I hope this never sells and it sits forever because I'm not willing to pay that. And it's sat for 2 years, but it's like the only one that's been listed publicly for sale. But if somebody wants to sell one of these closer to the actual market range, I am in the market if it's a nice example. And now, ooh, we always see one of these every year too, a complete collection of the Centennial Gibsons. So these were like 10,000-ish brand new, each and every single one of them. So that tells you 120,000, these did not hold value very well. 1994 is a really cool year for Gibson, but most of these, I'll be honest, I just don't like them that much. Sure, they've got the diamond in the headstock for the eye, and they have the bejeweled knobs, and they're supposed to be gold, but they naturally wear over the years, so most of the times they are darkened like the ones we see here. But in my eyes, most of these aren't quite special enough. Like the L5, that is just gorgeous. The 3-pickup Les Paul Custom, it's a bit gaudy and over the top, but it's also beautiful. The Les Paul Standards have never really done much for me. And the Flying V, hey, that one being 1984 is kind of cool because that's a significant year for Flying Vs. And at that time, a Gibson logo like that would have been interesting. The problem with these sets, though, is they're typically missing stuff. Missing anything on one of these guitars heavily affects the value because you're never going to be able to replace that. But as long as you have the ring, you're usually okay. So it looks like we got a couple of conversions, some more 335s, a couple of Les Paul Customs. But look at that. From the personal collection of Mr. Ace Man himself, number 1 of the Budokan Les Paul Custom. Now, this doesn't look like the very first iteration, but that's still pretty cool to have number 1 from the headstock repair one. Now, you always got to remember, number 1 is probably the coolest serial number to have, but there's always a prototype and there's artist proofs. Depending on the run, might trump having number 1. At least the prototype, definitely. Some runs, artist proofs are more common than others. But I know a guy who would probably like to own that, but I don't think he wants to pay that much for it. But you get free shoes. And as a general comment about the market lately surrounding artist signature guitars is things have gotten crazy for these low serial number 1s. Like here's a number 2 2010 Jimmy Page. I mean, this is a fairly modern guitar and it's asking $70,000 plus. But we're talking things like the Adam Jones signatures. I mean, I sold number 19 out of 79 for $25,000 this year. It ended up getting sold back to me for a little bit less. And that's not even the most one of those things has ever sold for. But in my opinion, 2022, we finally met the ceiling as far as where things are going. I no longer see things going higher in value. I think we've seen this one for a couple of years now. So they've come down on their price from $60,000 down to $48,000. I mean, it's a Super 400 art guitar. It's interesting. It's just so dark. You can't even see what they were trying to do, unfortunately. If this would have been done up in a natural finish and they had painted the carving or gave it a different stain to help it stand out, I bet this would have sold by now. Or maybe the shop needs to pay for some artistic professional photos of it that kind of helps show off the top a little bit. Because these photos just don't do much for appreciating the artistry. Speaking of things that are getting expensive, early 52 Goldtops. I remember you used to be able to pick these up 10 to 15,000, and if you were paying 15, you were almost overpaying. Nowadays, a lot of them are like 30, 40, so the market must be moving on these true vintage pieces. I haven't been paying attention to them because I generally don't buy them, but asking prices certainly are high, higher than when I did follow the market. I mean, sometimes it takes a while for the market to catch up because sometimes it's the guys who were there that have to retire from guitar collecting. So guys like me who weren't there to know that, oh, this is so bad. And we can actually appreciate them for what they are today. And that's what creates market change. That's why I think if you are seriously looking to invest in a guitar, which generally you're going to do better in the stock market anyway, you want to go for the next big and greatest thing. So in my opinion, that's like 90s and early 2000s because that's what's going to be nostalgic next. And then after that, eventually we'll get even to 2020s even being nostalgic in like 2050. And that's when Adam Jones models will probably see a second craze. I mean, you can predict this stuff, but you could also say, well, do people even like guitars anymore at that point? Will there be a collectible market? This all could just come to a halting crash. Now, personally, I could care less if the guitars that I own are all of a sudden worth nothing because I collect them because I like them. Here's an interesting Playboy guitar. That reminds me, Playboy bunny head guitar. That's a real thing. This one's interesting because it's number 1. Now, out of all the Playboy guitars that they did, this is probably one of the least attractive ones, but it's signed by Hugh, and he's no longer with us, so anybody who likes that culture is pretty cool. But if I had to own one, it would definitely be the sparkly pink one because it's just so crazy. And to end things off here tonight, here's an interesting listing that showed up. I mean, it's only expensive because you have to buy 4 guitars, but this is a 1988 showcase edition to Goldtop. What makes these cool is they're actually factory signed by Les Paul on the pickguard here. Now, there's supposed to be 200 of these in existence, and it was one of the only models from the showcase edition to not have factory stock EMG pickups for whatever reason. I mean, it doesn't really feel like it belongs within the showcase series, but it is what it is. But this guy has 4 of them, and he wants to sell them all. And with his new sale price, he's asking about $6,000 a pop. He's getting close. I really believe these range somewhere between $4,000 and $6,000. My suggestion to him would be to list them separately, one by one, wait for one to sell before you put the other one, and you need to start with the runt of the litter as far as condition goes, because there is a demand for those guitars, and I would like one for my own personal collection. But in my experience, buying a collection of guitars is not a very good way to do it because it's just impossible for them to actually tell you the true condition of them. And then when you get them, they're more beat up than you thought they would be, and then you overpaid. Let's face it, Reverb gives you 25 photos. That's not enough to sell 4 guitars. So to summarize things here, 2022 was a very interesting year. Towards the beginning, everything was going strong. It's that whole COVID rush yet from 2020 to 2021, lasted into early 2022. But all in all, I think things have finally hit a ceiling, at least for the time being, kind of judging on where the economy goes from here. Most things are staying pretty stable as far as pricing goes, but as more people need to sell things, we might see prices even come down. So outside of my previous buy the next big thing before it gets too crazy advice, I would say find something special and hold on to it. That's my philosophy. Find something that even if it becomes worth nothing, you still like it. Whether it plays very good or it's just a very cool model, get whatever speaks to you. All right, troglodytes, I hope you enjoyed tonight's episode. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll catch you tomorrow on the next one. Take care. If you enjoyed tonight's episode, consider subscribing. I post videos like this every day. And you might even enjoy this next one.